Welcome to the third lecture for Chapter 9. In this lecture, we are going to be talking about how we maintain the relationship after we form them. So in this lecture, we will be continuing on what we learned about relationship formation, really looking at that next step. So what is relational maintenance? We know that relational maintenance consists of strategic behaviors that help protect the relationship. It's really what keeps the relationship going, increases and maintains stability in the relationship. Oftentimes you're preserving the status quo. You could be repairing potential damage that's occurred in the relationship, but essentially you are maintaining acceptable levels of relational satisfaction or quality. So in a previous lecture, I really mentioned that relationships are work. And so essentially relational maintenance is the strategic work that we are doing to manage and to keep our relationships healthy. And so in this chapter, or in this lecture, we are going to be talking about some specific theories of relational maintenance, some theories that suggest how this occurs, that highlights important aspects. Relational maintenance is huge. It's a big part of our relationships. And so there's a lot of different ways and perspectives that we can look at how we maintain the health of our relationships and how we keep them going. The first theory of relational maintenance that I'm going to talk about is one that I previewed in the first lecture for this chapter, really covering dialectical tensions. And so this maintenance perspective is called the relational dialectics theory, and essentially relational dialectics theory suggests that there are these tensions that we manage in our relationship because we have these opposing needs, and the first common tension that are experienced in relationships is the tension between autonomy and connection. And this is essentially the tension between wanting to be our own person and to kind of have our own lives separate from the person that we're in a relationship with. Kind of the other side of the tension would be wanting to be with them and spend time with them. And so essentially we have autonomy, which is this feeling of wanting to be your own person, versus connection, the desire to be close, to build that close social bond, to be a part of that relationship, to spend time with them. And so in our relationships, we're managing this tension, right? We're managing how much time we spend with the person, maybe thinking about this in a framework of a romantic relationship, how much time we spend with that person versus how much time we spend with our friends outside of that person. So that's really managing that autonomy versus connection. The second deals with kind of how much we share about ourselves with that person, or how much we communicate about ourselves with that person. And this is the tension between openness and closedness. So openness would be this desire to disclose everything, to be completely open, completely honest, basically you're an open book with that person, versus the other side of the tension, which is closedness, this desire to maybe keep certain things for yourself, not share everything and every piece of your day and every piece of yourself with the other person. Essentially, closedness is privacy. So how much privacy is expected or negotiated in that relationship? Really looking at this tension here. And third, we have predictability versus novelty. Essentially, this desire in our relationships to have consistency, to have stability, to kind of have that level of comfort. You think about, you have close friends or close romantic partners that you've been with for a while. You know that person. You kind of know what the interactions are going to be like. It's pretty predictable. Versus novelty, the desire for something new, to have new experiences, to have unique experiences in that relationship. So when you think about it, if you live with somebody, maybe you're married, you've been with them for a very long time, it's pretty predictable. And my husband and I, sometimes we talk about, like, we're in a rut, right? We're in a rut. We have to get out of the rut. Let's do something fun. Let's have a date night. Let's go on vacation, just the two of us. And so that really introduces this novelty into the relationship. So we manage that tension as well. And so we experience these tensions in our relationship, and there are some specific strategies that go along with how to manage those tensions. And we call those strategies for managing dialectical tensions. And there are 8 of them that I'll talk about. So the first is denial. We can choose to respond to only one side of the tension and maybe ignore the other side. So I am going to just focus on connecting with my partner. I'm going to share everything, even though, maybe one of us may desire privacy, but we're going to completely ignore that part of the tension. That would be denial. Disorientation involves escaping the attention entirely, maybe by ending the relationship. So if maybe you're in a romantic relationship and the person is like too clingy, they, want to expect too much of your time. If you're in the early stages of that relationship, you might just be like, nope, like too clingy. I'm gonna end this relationship. So thinking about disorientation, escaping the tension entirely, and by ending the relationship. In family relationships, this may be a little different, right? You might like put a pause on the relationship. So instead of actually managing and working through and engaging in meta communication about what's going on, maybe you like just leave. Maybe you move out, or maybe you go back to school early, or whatever. You're not really ending the relationship, but you're really kind of ending the interaction that may continue to resolve the dialectical tension. Alternation is going back and forth between the two sides of the tension. So we might choose to for a short period of time, focus on spending time together, and then we spend some time apart, and then we spend a lot of time together, and then we spend a lot of time apart. So kind of think about this as maybe like a wave chart. So at some points we are really focusing on maybe predictability. We are in that comfort, and then we introduce a lot of novelty for a while, and then we go back to this kind of predictability. So going back and forth between both sides of the tension. Segmentation is dealing with one side of the tension in some aspects or segments in the relationship, and dealing with the other side of the tension in other segments. So when we think about kind of the different interactions in our relationships, thinking maybe about openness versus closedness, in our face-to-face communication, maybe about our daily lives, about our work, about our family relationships, we have complete openness, but there are other aspects where we have maybe privacy, like maybe on our technology. So I don't get in and hack into your social media, or I don't have the password to your phone. So there's certain segments where there's complete openness, and there's certain segments where there's more closedness, more privacy. And so that would be kind of segmentation. So segmenting out different areas of the tension, or different areas of the relationship, different situations, and choosing which of those segments is going to preference which side of the tension. Balance is compromising between the two opposing forces. So compromise is essentially both people giving in a little bit. So one person maybe wants predictability, and one person wants novelty, and maybe you compromise in some unique way to please at least partially both sides of the tension. And this can look fairly different. It sometimes depends on the situation. Integration is trying to develop behaviors that will satisfy both sides of the tension simultaneously. So this is a little bit different from balance, because balance is a compromise. It means that at least both people aren't getting everything that they want. Integration is more like collaboration, in that we are trying to find a unique solution that makes everyone completely happy, and that can look different, again, depending on the situation. But balance involves compromise, and involves not getting kind of everything, both people giving in a little bit. Integration is working together to find a unique solution that's going to satisfy everyone completely. Recalibration is reframing the tension so that the contradiction between the opposing needs disappears. So this may be gaining a different perspective on the situation, looking at it from a different angle, so that the kind of tension is no longer present, or no longer an issue, no longer a factor. And finally, reaffirmation is embracing the dialectical tension as a part of normal life. So in the predictability versus novelty, if we just kind of embrace that when you've been married for 25 years, there's not a lot of novelty, you don't get those butterflies in your stomach, and that's just the way it goes. Like, that's just how marriage is, and we just have to deal with it. That's an example of kind of reaffirmation, just embracing the tension as part of normal life, as part of the normal trajectory of the relationship, and just kind of sitting with that. The second theory of relational maintenance is social exchange theory. And social exchange theory really goes back to that idea of cost versus rewards. So thinking about we want relationships where the benefits outweigh the costs of being in the relationship. And so this theory really addresses like whether we're going to stay and maintain that relationship, whether we're going to stay and do the work, or whether we may potentially end the relationship. So we're really thinking about this decision to stay, this decision to maintain here based on the cost and the benefits of being in that relationship. And the social exchange theory really functions based on two dimensions. The first is essentially our satisfaction in the relationship, and we call this the comparison level. So this comparison level determines satisfaction based on what is our realistic expectation of what we want and what we think we deserve from this relationship type. So if we think about like, what do I deserve from being in a romantic relationship, and what is a realistic expectation of the behaviors, the rules, the expectations, of the norms of what it means to be in a romantic relationship, and how my romantic partner should perform. And when the actuality, your perception of that being in that relationship, those behaviors match the realistic expectation and what you think you deserve, then you're going to be satisfied. When it doesn't, then you're gonna be low on comparison level, and you're gonna have low satisfaction. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. The other factor that's really important is comparison level for alternatives. So thinking about, if we leave this relationship, how many opportunities are there for me to develop other relationships like this? So if we think about it from kind of the dating perspective, if I get out of this romantic relationship, is there the possibility that I'm going to be able to find another romantic relationship down the road? And so, your comparison level may be high when you're young. Maybe you have a lot of friends of, that maybe you have a lot of suitors, or just even kind of you have your life ahead of you and you have a lot of opportunity to meet new people. Whereas if you find yourself maybe in a bad relationship when you're 75 years old, the options may not be as high. Your comparison level for alternatives may not be as high. And so in that case, you might stay in a relationship that maybe you're unsatisfied with. So these two dimensions interact to create four kind of situations, four determinations of whether or not a person is going to stay and work to maintain that relationship, or whether or not they may leave the relationship. So when our satisfaction is high, so looking at the top left-hand box, when our satisfaction is high, but our comparison levels for alternatives is high, it's a toss-up, right? The relationship is satisfying, but we might end it because there might be another option that's more attractive. And so we see this in our romantic relationships sometimes, right? Like, you're like, it's not you, it's me kind of conversation, right? Like this relationship was great, you didn't do anything wrong, I just found somebody else who's better for me, who satisfies a different need. If we move to the top right-hand box, when our comparison level is low, but our alternatives is high, we're definitely going to end that relationship. We're not going to maintain that relationship. So the relationship is dissatisfying, and there's other alternatives out there, right? There's 5 other people who want to be in a romantic relationship with me. So I'm going to ditch this person and I'm going to go seek out those other options. Dissatisfying relationship, high alternatives, we're going to leave the relationship. If we go to the bottom left-hand corner, when our satisfaction is high, but our comparison level for alternatives is low, then we're going to stay in the relationship. We're going to work to maintain it. So we're really satisfied in our relationship, and we perceive that there's nobody else out there who can love me, who can take care of me, who can be the best friend, who can be that person for me out there. So this may not even just be like quantity, right? It could also be quality of relationship. So, maybe I have, other people who have expressed romantic interest, but I perceive them as not being as good of partner as the person I'm currently with, potentially because that relationship is really satisfying for me. So even though there's there's potential alternatives, my perception of those alternatives are bad, and so I'm still going to rate my comparison level of alternatives as being low, because even though there's people that want to date me, all those people suck and they're not as good as the person that I'm currently with. And so right there we get that bottom left-hand corner, right? Our comparison level is high, we're really satisfied, and our perception of the alternatives is low. There are no other satisfactory alternatives, and so we're going to stay in the relationship. We're going to do the work. The bottom right-hand corner represents a situation where maybe we are unhappy in our relationship. Maybe the person, is abusive, or maybe they're just not really nice to us, or they're really just not who we think we should be with. Maybe we think, okay, this isn't great. But our comparison level for alternatives is low. So maybe there are no other alternatives. Maybe we're in a situation where we don't know a lot of people. We're isolated. Maybe we are at a different, older stage in our life. Maybe we have low self-esteem and we don't perceive that we could meet anybody better than what we have. So in these instances, we're likely to stay, and we can see potentially using this theory why people stay in bad relationships, right? Even though they're not happy, they do not perceive that there are any other options. Like, being in this relationship is better than being alone in their perspective. And so based on the social exchange theory, they're going to maintain that relationship. They're going to stay. The third theory of relational maintenance is equity theory. And so equity theory really is also termed the fairness theory. And it states that when we are in relationships, we desire to have this level of equity, this fairness. We want the other person in the relationship to put in as much work as we are putting in. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they have to maintain the relationship in the same way, right? Like, if I do a load of laundry, I don't expect my husband to then do a load of laundry. If we do 3 loads of laundry each, or whatever, right? It could be that, I do the housework and my husband takes care of our son. And so we're doing different activities, but the amount of work that we're putting into the relationship is fairly equal. It's the same. And in that case, we would find that relationship pretty satisfactory. But we know that sometimes people don't put in the same amount of effort. And so in this case, we know that people who are equitably treated, they are happier, right? So when we have this balance, when we have fairness in the relationships, there's higher levels of contentment, higher levels of relational satisfaction, less conflict, less anger, less sadness, less guilt, than people who are under-benefited or over-benefited. And so when we think about when it's not fair, we kind of have these two situations. We have being under-benefited, and so the under-benefited would be when you are putting a lot into the relationship, you're working really hard, you're using a lot of maintenance strategies, and the other person isn't really doing much. Sometimes we see this, like, if you constantly are making plans, you're constantly inviting people places, and they never return the favor. Maybe you always ask about how your friend's day was, and they never reciprocate, right? And so in this case, you may feel under-benefited. You're putting a lot into the relationship, and you're not getting a lot in return. And so that, again, is going to potentially decrease your satisfaction. You might have some sadness. You might be frustrated. That might add stress. It's not equitable. Over-benefiting could be when you're in the other seat, right? So maybe the person is constantly doing nice things for you. They're always buying you little gifts. They're always bringing you cookies. They're doing all kinds of nice things for you. And you feel that you aren't doing as much, or maybe you can't do as much. And so you're going to feel over-benefited. In this case, we might feel guilty. We might feel smothered. We might end the relationship, or we might find ways that we can balance it out and get back that level of balance. And so according to this theory, because when we have these levels, this kind of fairness, when the work is distributed equitably, we are motivated to maintain these fair relationships. And in order to do so, we must engage in a variety of relational maintenance strategies. And that is the last thing that we are going to talk about today. So your chapter identified 5 important relational maintenance strategies. The first is positivity, maintaining pleasant interactions. This can include things as kind of just maintaining a cheerful attitude, maybe reframing negative like criticisms or negative feelings in the relationship to more positive ones, maybe engaging in spontaneous and fun activities. So just kind of like looking on the bright side, maintaining positivity in the relationship is a strategy for keeping things healthy and happy. Openness is also a strategy. So thinking about, kind of discussing current and future directions of the relationship, talking and listening to one another about your days, what's going on, supporting each other, encouraging one another, really here in this openness category. The third strategy is assurances, and this is really tapping into that characteristic of commitment. So not just being committed, but assuring the other person that you are committed. So showing either through verbal communication or in your actions, or both likely, that you are committed to the relationship. You're faithful, you're going to be there, you're engaging in that emotional, kind of those different levels of commitment and support in the relationship. The fourth is social networks, and we've talked a little bit about this as well. We kind of talked about investment and social commitment. So relying on, kind of spending time with each other's family, being able to incorporate kind of maybe different friend groups. I talked in a previous lecture about kind of maybe splitting holidays between families, and so all of these things would be managing your social networks to maintain your relationship. And the last is engaging in shared tasks and joint activities. So this is, kind of the example of the work that I gave in the equity theory. So doing your fair share of work and chores around the house. Maybe that means doing activities together. Maybe you fold the laundry together while you watch TV. Maybe while one person washes the dishes, the other person dries them. Whatever that looks like, it could be kind of doing these kind of routine chores and activities together. And that's a way that we can maintain equity as well as maintain the relationship. So that summarizes the different theories of relational maintenance that were discussed in Chapter 9. For your individual activity for this chapter, I'm going to have you work through the relational dialectics theory. I've selected, I have a brief narrative, and I've selected a that represents a dialectical tension, the tension between autonomy and connection. And what I would like for you to do in this activity is to read the scenario and then use the different strategies that we talked about in the lecture for today and that are in your book to kind of complete the narrative. So what would it look like if either Raul or his parents, the two characters in the narrative, used each of those strategies to manage the tension of autonomy and connection that they're experiencing? I've given an example for denial, and so I want you to do the remaining 7 strategies. And you can kind of add to the narrative. You can create your own unique you can add to what's already in the narrative. You aren't bound to what is only there. So if you want to maybe add based on the strategy that you're working on, maybe some details to the narrative, you can feel free to do that as it's relevant and useful. When you've completed the assignment, please upload it to the assignment link. The next lecture is going to be on terminating the relationship, and when you've completed that lecture, then you are ready to go on to the class discussion.